Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, 1870–1924. Political theorist and strong leader of the Bolshevik Revolution who turned Russia under King Tsar to become the first communist country in the world. In the summer of 1990, shocking news spread throughout the world from some Soviet cities. Statue of Lenin, the most important leader in the 1917 communist uprising, a statue of Lenin breaks down and sells the pieces. Then, in September 1991, Leningrad was officially renamed St. Petersburg. For a long time in the 20th century, Lenin's image was considered and revered in the Soviet Union. He was portrayed as the leader of the revolution everywhere. Photos of him can be seen in all classrooms and libraries, or in large public places, such as in hotels, at train stations, and in the plain fields and where the masses gather. Hundreds of books written about Lenin. Children are taught to imitate him, to study like him, to dress like him, to brush their teeth like him. From 1917 to 1924, at the time of his death, Lenin was the undisputed leader of the Soviet government. The name Lenin is associated with Karl Marx in compiling Marxist-Leninist theory, a regime that covers more than one-third of the human life on Earth. Even Lenin's enemies were forced to acknowledge that Lenin's thoughts and actions inspired one of the greatest events of the 20th century. Now, as the 20th century draws to a close, the once fascinating world of communism is collapsing. Nevertheless, Lenin's shadow is still in the shadows before us. Clearly, Lenin will be remembered as one of the most important figures in human history. Lenin's great future, in fact, some people did not expect that when he was born on April 22, 1870. When Lenin was born, his parents have two boys already. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, his real name, was born in the small town of Simbirsk near Volga River, and later had three siblings. All but one became a revolutionary. Lenin's father, Ilya Ulyanov, son of a poor tailor, but through hard work, he became a teacher and later became the principal of a large public school on the Volga River. Ilya Ulyanov was a staunch supporter of the Tsar and also a staunch and active Russian Orthodox Christian. Through his official position as principal, he was considered a nobleman, although in terms of economics, money, the Ulyanov family should be considered middle class. Lenin's mother, Maria Alexandrovna Ulyanova, is of German descent and is the daughter of a doctor. Lenin's mother speaks 4 languages and loves history, literature, and music. When she got married, she had very little money, so she did not go into cultural life in Russia's major cities. She also plays an important role in educating children. Lenin was influenced by his older brother, Alexander Ulyanov, or Sasha. Sasha, who was older than Lenin 4 years, became a role model for Lenin. Even when it comes to hanging out or wanting to eat, Lenin replied, "Be like Sasha." The two children have different looks and personalities. Alexander is tall, thin, quiet, and likes to be alone. Lenin was short but big, with a tiger's jaw and small eyes, like his Mongolian father, Vladimir, unlike Sasha. But the two do a lot of activities together, such as fishing, swimming in the summer, playing on the ice in the winter. And almost every night they play chess, which is the most popular Russian game. Sometimes the children of the Ulyanov family like to play war games as soldiers. During this game, Vladimir decides to play the role of Abraham Lincoln, the leader of the U.S. Army against the slave-held South. As he got older, Vladimir became more and more interested in learning, especially in Latin and Greek, but he also read many books on history, literature, and global economy. He pays special attention to improving the quality of writing and public speaking. At the age of 16, he passed the first-class exam in high school. At the same time, he imitated his brother, Alexander, by declaring that he no longer believed in God. He later told this story to himself that when he decided there was no more God, he took the cross of God came out of his neck, spat, and threw away. Shortly before Vladimir passed his high school diploma, the Ulyanov family experienced two tragic events. One is Ilya Ulyanov, The father was dead. Alexander also played the role of the man in charge of the family. Then, in 1887, news came from the capital, St. Petersburg, of an event that changed Vladimir's life forever. Alexander, student at the University of St. Petersburg, was arrested on charges of joining a group of rebel youths who attempted to assassinate Tsar Alexander III of Russia. Maria, the mother, also travels to the capital. All efforts hope to save his son's life at the capital. She wrote a letter. One and the other asked the king to leave the life for his son, but the king did not change his mind. Alexander was finally hanged and died. So far, young Vladimir has paid little attention to politics. He wanted to be a professor of classical literature and humanity in college. But when his beloved brother, Sasha, is dead, he said he will revenge. Vladimir no longer studying humanity, he asked to go to law school at the University of Kazan. The Ulyanov family also sold their house in Simbirsk and moved to Kazan to get closer to Vladimir and to start a new life. After attending law school for only 3 months, Vladimir was expelled from school for allegedly joining a student anti-meeting and his brother, Alexander, for attempting to assassinate the king. The authorities decided to do this for him, to serve as a warning to others. Subsequent petitions also did not help Vladimir to return to law school. However, the police later allowed Vladimir to return to Kazan, but did not allow him to attend any university classes. If Vladimir want to graduate from law school, you have to study on your own. But in 1 year, Vladimir Ulyanov learns a 4-year law school program. He scored the highest in all exam subjects. Kazan University was also forced to confer a degree on him with further honors. Upon entering the legal profession, Vladimir immediately joined the legal team in the nearby town of Samara and also became a public defender, supporting the cause of the peasants and the poor in need. During this time, he read many books on philosophy and politics. The book by an author named Karl Marx turned Ulyanov's life. According to Karl Marx, the whole of history was a conflict between the rich oppressing the poor for the benefit of the rich. Only a violent revolution could liberate the oppressed people from the capital class. The capital that the rich own the factory as a means of production. Marx predicted that after the revolution that would take place only in a matter of time, they would be able to organize a new life. Wealth will be shared and people work for the benefit of the nation as a whole, not just for personal gain. From then on, the formula for work and pay is one for each person to work to the best of their ability and each one gets what he or she needs. For young Vladimir Ulyanov, Marx's view, as stated in the classic book Das Kapital, is more than a good dream. It is a plan to transform the bitter competition in the market into a new, functional way of life. In the whole world the rich no need for fierce conflict like in the jungle, and the poor can have pleasure and eating abundance. For Vladimir Ulyanov the book named Das Kapital also became a book not inferior to the Christian Bible. In January 1889, he officially became a Marxist follower. Then he started calling himself a Marxist. He also moved to St. Petersburg capital, which one day was named Leningrad in his honor. There he planned to meet with other Marxists, known at the time as Social Democrats. He assisted in writing a political booklet for distribution to the workers. He has taught Marxism to workers and encouraged workers to strike against factory owners to demand higher wages and better working conditions. The Russian government was not happy about such actions. In 1895, the Russian government arrested Ulyanov and sentenced him for several months before taking him to Siberia for a for a 3-year foreign trial. His friend and colleague Nadezhda Krupskaya were also deported together. He also married her in 1898. The two translated the Russian a book entitled Industrial Democracy of English Socialists Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Ulyanov also wrote the first book out of his 56 books. The first book, entitled Evolution of Capitalism in Russia, explains that Russia is no longer an agricultural country but an industrial country. He declared that with this, the time had come for the factory workers to revolt, which was an uprising of the working class. It was then that Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov decided to stop using his family name, from then until he was known in history as Lenin. When Lenin was released from exile in 1900, he immediately traveled to Munich, Germany, to help write a new revolutionary newspaper, Iskra. When Krupskaya released from exile, she also visited Lenin in Munich. They both started to write a very important book named What to Do. In 1902. This book, there are some places that go beyond Marx, offering strategies to win. For example, it is said that the next revolution can only be won if all power is concentrated in the hands of a small group of people. This small group of people work through one party. That can make a revolution happen. Next, they will educate the people of Russia and the people of other countries about socialism doctrine. Later, in the end, the whole universe will become socialist and free. By then, according to Marx and Lenin, there would be no need for a government. The state will gradually dissolve and disappear at once, and since then there has been equality and abundance of fun. But the first step is to have a team of leaders who are disciplined, strong, and go through a high level of training, a group of people who are highly dedicated under Lenin's leadership. In 1902 Lenin moved to London, as did Marx, Lenin spending much of his daily work at the British Museum Library. He read many books and articles on the necessities of a socialist revolution. During his stay in London, he met a young man named Lev Davidovich Bronstein, a wise Russian Jew who had become one of Lenin's closest and most trusted associates. Bronstein played a very important role to take Marxist power in Russia, and is historically known as Leon Trotsky. It was in London that Lenin also succeeded in taking control of the Russian Social Democrat Workers' Party. Lenin's victory over the mattress that wants the party open to whom want to enter, can also enter, not the party of a small group of people like Lenin wanted. Lenin's strict stance was adopted by a slightly overwhelming majority. From then on, members of the party that agreed with Lenin were known as the Bolsheviks, the majority, while the opponents who wanted a more moderate and loose party were called the Mensheviks. From then on, the Bolsheviks considered themselves to be the forerunners of the working class, the leaders who provided guidance and education to the working class, and according to Lenin, they are the overthrew Russia. Next, they will bring socialism to the whole world. Those who knew Lenin of that generation, said that he focuses on revolutionary work, who thinks only about his personal life a little bit. Lenin has a bald head like his father and has a mustache and a red beard. He usually wears ordinary middle-class clothes. Many people say that Lenin did not have the ability to write and rhetorical like Trotsky. However, those who have met him in person have always been fascinated by the influence of his personality, especially his sharp eyes and unrelenting energy that releases fearlessly to complete his work. He refuses to take a chair in the room or a soft pillow on the bed. He was a hard worker, a very thorough person, and a very thoughtful person. He looked old, even though he was young. Some say that while sleeping, Lenin also dreamed of a revolution. In 1905, the revolution erupted in Russia but was crushed by the government. Lenin returned to Russia too late. However, his return to the homeland led Lenin to reconsider his revolutionary ideas based on the working class, the industrial class. Now Lenin began to speak in support of the peasantry as one of his own. Lenin had the opinion that the revolutionary work belonged to the workers, peasants, and intellectuals, thinkers, all united to win. From 1905 to 1914, Lenin became more aware of the wars between European nations in order to conquer the empire and seize territory overseas. Drawing on Marx's ideas, he argued that such wars would only make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Lenin also pointed out that soldiers who died on the battlefield were generally the descendants of the poor. That is why when World War I broke out in 1914, Lenin was very upset to see so many socialists proudly supporting its nation in this conflict. To him, the war is just another example of capital being made even richer by the blood of the poor. At the same time, Lenin believed that if Russia were to be weakened by the war, it might be time for a revolution. In his book entitled Imperialism is the Peak of Capitalism, Lenin explained that only a socialist revolution can bring true and lasting peace. The war was still strong, but there was still no revolution against King Tsar Nicholas II for a while. Even Lenin himself was hopeless, but in March 1917, when he was really desperate, suddenly the soldiers in the St. Petersburg were starving and they were weary of the war. Stand up. The royalism was overthrown at that time. New government led by Alexander Kerensky on socialism, but the truth is not as extremist as Lenin. Coincidentally, Kerensky was the son of the principal of Simbirsk High School of Lenin. The principal wrote a good letter of introduction, which allowed Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov to attend law school. Lenin was first informed of the revolution during his stay in Switzerland. Lenin asked for permission and was immediately granted permission by the German authorities to travel through Germany by train to Russia. Germany is happy and agrees to this request, hoping that Lenin and his revolutionaries will overthrow the government of Kerensky and make a strong enemy Russia to stop fighting. If so, Germany can send troops stationed in the bloody Eastern Battle to the Battle of the West to fight French and English. Lenin and his comrades boarded a train that locked its doors and closed its doors and arrived in Petrograd. King Tsar changed the name from St. Petersburg to Petrograd on April 16, 1917. Since the revolution, workers' councils, or called Soviets, have emerged both in Petrograd and throughout Russia. Lenin, Trotsky and the Bolsheviks immediately took action. They declared that Russia needed to stop the war. Soldiers need peace, farmers have to take ownership of the land they work on. Hungry industrial workers must got food. The slogan of the Bolsheviks at that time was peace, land, bread. Lenin proclaimed that soldiers, farmers, and workers must unite to make a real revolution. By then, not as long as Lenin and Marx had promised before, there would be no government. The state will gradually dissolve and die. But in the meantime, Lenin's motto was that all power must be given to the Soviets. Enraged by Lenin's attack, Kerensky tried to capture Lenin. But Lenin shaved his beard and disguised himself as a Finnish national train worker and escaped into exile in Finland. In October 1917, Lenin returned to Petrograd. By then, the situation in Russia had reached a point of complete despair. Soldiers on the front lines fled. Thousands of hungry people walked the streets in big cities. On November 7, 1917, the Soviet Union Petrograd under Trotsky command, launches open rebellion against the Kerensky government. Bolsheviks armed with a group of weapons known as Red Guards also participated in action too. The Communist Revolution also began. By November 8, the fighting had to end. The Kerensky government was overthrown. Lenin was elected. Lenin, already with no experience in government in his life, he immediately became the leader of one of the largest countries in the world. A few days before coming to power, Lenin was still a fugitive hiding from the police. Although inexperienced, Lenin acted swiftly and decisively. Lenin nationalized all industrial banks and land. Later in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Lenin signed peace agreements with Germany and other powers. Russia has lost much of its territory, but Russia needs much needed peace to restore its strength. He will then declare that he will not repay the loan to the government. Lenin took all foreign property in Russia and declared it Soviet property. Most of the angry people, the rich class, came to fight back. They named themselves the White Army and started a civil war against the Red Army. They had more soldiers, more money, more logistics, but still could not defeat the Bolsheviks. Lenin gathers farmers for his side, seizes a large plot of land for free, and gives the land to the people. Lenin gathers industrial workers, promising to provide food and housing. Promising not to force them into a new government if they need to leave at any time. Finally, Lenin helped Trotsky organize an effective combat force called the Red Army. By the winter of 1921, the Whites were completely defeated. Civil war is also completed. During the years of fighting, Lenin had very little rest. As a child, he enjoyed outdoor activities such as horseback riding, boating, and hunting. But when he came to power, he decided not to entertain like that anymore. Even taking some time, listening to Beethoven's music or playing chess, Lenin did not do it because he felt it was a waste of time to think about government work. In 1918, a homeless young man named Fanny Kaplan attempted to assassinate Lenin by firing 2 shots at him. Lenin does not die, but can still affect health on a regular basis. Then, in 1922, Lenin developed a mental illness that left him paralyzed. Lenin spent a lot of time trying to get diplomatic recognition from all over the world. Most countries except the United States also admit that Lenin's new government, now called the Soviet Union, was a reality. They also exchanged ambassadors with the Soviet Union. Lenin then rose to support the rights of the people under colonial rule, the people living in the countries occupied by France and Britain. Lenin convinced the people that in the pursuit of freedom was national liberation they had a friend, the Soviet Union. This belief, though sometimes false, has been lingering until the last decade of this century. From 1921 onwards, Lenin began to see serious problems in his government. Everywhere he saw, the tide of protectionist sentiment is flowing. Soon there was a huge bureaucracy. Many office workers took over by and controlled by Stalin was an ambitious debtor who gradually consolidated power. But Stalin was under pressure at every step. As Lenin's illness worsened, Stalin and Trotsky fought bitterly for control of the party. In December 1922, Lenin suffered another mental illness. Lenin tried to strive and fight bravely to recover from illness, and then he tried to not let the government, which he devotes his physical and mental strength to a point, increasingly violate the law. Lenin sees that Stalin does not care about the deep cause of liberating mankind from the abyss of evil ride. At that time, Lenin writes, Stalin is an angry man, he will pay too much chili in the soup. I suggest our friends find a way to remove him out. Lenin was right. Stalin later became one of the most brutal oppressors in history. Lenin's health deteriorates and he participates in government affairs less and less. He eventually became disabled and lived with his wife, Krupskaya, in a small house in Gory, Georgia, near Moscow. At just 54 years old, he could barely speak. He later developed a mental illness that left him speechless. On January 21, 1924, Lenin contracted dementia again. This time he also had to die. Joseph Stalin ordered the retrieval of Lenin's body and placed it in a red stone tomb outside the Kremlin wall in Moscow's Moscow's Red Square. Since then, millions of people have lined up, quiet, no matter how cold or hot the weather, to see the corpse. From the year Lenin died until the beginning of World War II, Stalin sent about 7 million people to death. Nearly 1 million more people were killed by the Soviet government, Soviet Union becoming a place of terror and torture. The result, it's not like Lenin's idea. Lenin wanted people to live together in harmony in a world without hunger and no war. But such hopes turn into nightmares. And for many people who have been through so much abuse, understand that is Lenin's actions that led to this situation. Whether they have this opinion is right or wrong, it is very difficult to judge. But it is understandable that at the end of the 20th century, people in the Soviet Union and in other countries under Soviet that time, those countries around the world decided to act as they had already done. They begin to overthrow the statues erected in honor of Lenin. When the statue of Lenin lay on the ground, some passers-by caught the feeling of Lenin's eyes, his eyes looking deep and sharp at the sculptors clearly carved. We can ask, what would Lenin think if he saw through his sharp eyes the world today, the world that he himself had tried so hard to create? Vladimir Lenin theory. 1. Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country. 2. Imperialism is the monopoly stage of capitalism. 3. Liberty is precious, so precious that it must be rationed. 4. While the state exists, there can be no freedom. When there is freedom there will be no state. 5. Democracy is not identical with majority rule. Democracy is a state which recognizes the subjection of the minority to the majority, that is, an organization for the systematic use of force by one class against the other, by one part of the population against another.